The vast, cold reaches of the galaxy had long concealed horrors beyond the comprehension of even the most battle-hardened warriors of the Imperium. But among these nightmares, none bore the brutal simplicity and relentless hunger of the Tyranids. They arrived in silence, unseen and unsuspected, and when the first Imperial sentries glimpsed them, it was already too late. Their existence marked the start of a new chapter of fear, one that would plunge the galaxy into a brutal struggle for survival. The earliest signs of the Tyranids' approach were barely noticeable, lost among the routine cries for aid in the endless star systems overseen by the Imperium of Man. Initial reports were disregarded as mundane, colonies going silent, planets stripped bare of life. Yet, to the few in the Imperium who recognized the warning signs, the pattern spoke of a larger, darker presence. These whispers of impending danger reached the High Lords of Terra and, eventually, the ears of the Ultramarines, one of the most disciplined and revered Space Marine chapters. Led by Marneus Calgar, a tactician whose strategic brilliance was tempered by first-hand experience on battlefields across the stars, the Ultramarines prepared to engage an enemy they had yet to fully understand. Calgar, alongside his trusted veteran warriors, recognized that this threat was unlike any they had faced before. The Tyranids were not just another alien race seeking territory. They were a biological swarm designed for a singular purpose: to devour every living thing in their path. As the Ultramarines mobilized, reports grew increasingly grim. The creatures, soon to be identified as Hive Fleet Behemoth, approached in such overwhelming numbers that even entire armies found themselves engulfed within moments of contact. The Tyranids were a swarm of endless adaptability, each encounter revealing new biological horrors, weapons created from bone and sinew, and creatures that ranged from skittering scouts to hulking monstrosities. At first, Calgar thought the Tyranids could be outflanked, that tactical precision might overcome their sheer numbers. But this assumption quickly shattered under the brutal reality of their power. Hive Fleet Behemoth first struck with devastating efficiency, tearing through the eastern fringe and laying waste to numerous worlds in the process. The Tyranids moved as a singular, ravenous intelligence, driven by the will of the hive mind, a vast, interlinked consciousness that coordinated every movement and attack. It became clear that the Tyranids did not negotiate or spare resources. They left planets barren, stripping every molecule of organic matter before moving on, leaving only dead worlds in their wake. This was more than simple conquest. It was extermination on a galactic scale. When Calgar and his Ultramarines finally engaged the Tyranids in open combat, they quickly realized they were up against a foe that defied their usual strategies. Calgar's initial skirmishes with smaller Tyranid bioforms served as a brutal introduction. The enemy was relentless and indifferent to losses, each fallen creature simply replaced by a fresh wave from the swarm. The Tyranids were far more than just numbers, however. They were adaptable, learning from each encounter, shifting tactics, and evolving new biological adaptations with frightening speed. The desperation of the Ultramarines mounted as they came face to face with the realization that the Tyranid strength lay not just in their numbers, but in their biology. Each creature seemed born with a specific function. Smaller Tyranid gaunts swarmed over defenses, their clawed limbs and razor-sharp teeth perfect for tearing through flesh and armor alike. Towering Carnifexes charged forward, their armored exoskeletons capable of deflecting all but the heaviest firepower. And lurking behind were the Hive Tyrants, towering behemoths that directed the swarm with calculated malice, puppets of the Hive mind itself. Every fallen Space Marine and Guardsman only provided more biomass for the Hive to consume, strengthening and replenishing the swarm. Faced with an opponent that could not be intimidated, negotiated with, or outmaneuvered, Calgar and his Ultramarines made their final stand on the world of Macridge, the heart of Ultramarine territory. The Battle of Macridge would become a defining moment in the Tyrannic Wars, a showdown between the disciplined might of the Imperium and the primal, insatiable hunger of the Tyranid swarm. Calgar understood that Macridge was more than just a strategic position. It was a symbol of the Imperium's resilience. He knew the Hive fleet sought to eradicate every trace of life, leaving the galaxy a barren wasteland. The Tyranids' invasion came like a wave crashing against a cliff. Thousands of Ultramarine defenders braced themselves as wave after wave of bioengineered monstrosities surged across the frozen plains and through fortified corridors. As each creature fell, others took its place, each one a remorseless cog in the hive mind's vast, unfeeling machine. Calgar himself fought in the heart of the battle, his ancient power fists tearing through wave after wave of alien flesh. The defenders held against insurmountable odds, but at a steep cost. Whole companies were lost, their names forever etched into the annals of Macridge's history. By the end of the engagement, both the Tyranid swarm and the Ultramarines lay in bloody tatters. Hive Fleet Behemoth was repulsed, but the victory was hollow. Macridge stood, yet the cost of this victory weighed heavily on Calgar and his surviving warriors. The Tyranids had not merely challenged the Ultramarines. They had exposed a vulnerability in the Imperium, a realization that no amount of valor could fully prepare humanity for the raw, unyielding hunger of the hive mind. The people of Macridge hailed their defenders as heroes, but in the hearts of the Ultramarines, there was little room for celebration. Only the looming shadow of the Tyranid menace. Word of this encounter spread quickly through the Imperium, and with it, the grim understanding that Hive Fleet Behemoth had only been the first. The Tyranids had been thwarted but not vanquished, and somewhere in the endless dark of space, other Hive fleets likely lurked, biding their time, waiting to strike anew. Calgar's thoughts turned from the ashes of victory to the inevitable wars that lay ahead. The Imperium was vast, but so too was the Tyranid hunger, and in the face of this silent, devouring force, every living thing in the galaxy now stood on the edge of extinction. In that moment, Calgar knew the war was far from over. It had only just begun. The Imperium's first encounter with the Tyranids during Hive Fleet Behemoth had proven to be a brutal warning, yet it was only the beginning. The galaxy remained on high alert, with every sector commander, Imperial Guard regiment, and Space Marine chapter preparing for the inevitability of further Tyranid invasions. And soon enough, the Tyranid menace reemerged, with a level of devastation that would etch the subsequent conflicts, the Second and Third Tyrannic Wars, into the Imperium's darkest history. The Second Tyrannic War began with the arrival of Hive Fleet Kraken, a swarm more vast and insidious than Behemoth. Unlike the blunt force tactics of its predecessor, Kraken advanced with unnerving precision, splitting into multiple tendrils that spread across the Imperium's eastern fringe. This Hive fleet targeted multiple worlds at once, stretching Imperial defenses thin and forcing commanders to choose between defending one system and abandoning another. Among those caught in Kraken's path was the renowned Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels, an ancient space marine warrior whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his unyielding devotion to the Emperor. Dante, whose centuries of warfare had made him intimately familiar with the Imperium's enemies, quickly understood the unprecedented threat Kraken posed. He recognized that Kraken's multi-pronged assaults were not just a tactical maneuver. They were a trap designed to overwhelm even the mightiest space marine chapters. Dante organized his forces, sending strike teams to intercept Kraken's splinter fleets while preparing his main forces for the inevitable direct clash. Yet, no matter how many bioships the Blood Angels destroyed, there always seemed to be more, each learning and adapting to their defenses. In one of the most infamous engagements of the Second Tyrannic War, Dante and the Blood Angels clashed with Kraken on the jungle world of Lysios. Swarms of Tyranid gaunts poured from the dark underbrush, their chittering sounds filling the air as they charged. Larger Tyranid creatures lumbered forward, crushing defenses underfoot, while monstrous Tyranid flyers blotted out the sun as they dove toward the Blood Angels' ranks. Dante fought at the forefront, his golden armor gleaming as he led his troops, wielding his power axe with deadly precision. His presence on the battlefield was like a beacon, a symbol of the Emperor's light against the overwhelming darkness of the Tyranid swarm. Despite their bravery, the Blood Angels found themselves increasingly cornered, each wave of Tyranids seemingly stronger and more relentless than the last. Finally, in a desperate maneuver, Dante ordered his forces to make a final stand, holding out until a supporting force of Ultramarines could arrive. For days, the Blood Angels endured, the jungle soaked in blood, and the ground littered with the remains of Tyranid bioforms. When the Ultramarines finally reached them, they found Dante and his warriors battered but unbroken, standing amid a sea of alien corpses. Yet, even in victory, Dante knew that Hive Fleet Kraken was far from defeated. The Second Tyrannic War raged on for years, costing countless lives and leaving entire sectors in ruins. Ultimately, Kraken was repulsed, but the Imperium paid a terrible price, with many worlds permanently scarred or completely lost to the swarm. Kraken's defeat, while celebrated, also served as a grim reminder that the Tyranids were evolving, adapting, and growing stronger with each encounter. And once again, there was no time for rest. The Imperium knew that where one Hive fleet fell, another would soon rise. The Third Tyrannic War erupted with the arrival of Hive Fleet Leviathan, a monstrous swarm unlike any encountered before. Leviathan approached not from the eastern fringe, but from beneath the galactic plane, catching the Imperium off guard and threatening a core-ward path straight through some of humanity's most heavily populated sectors. Leviathan was unlike Kraken in its tactics. It possessed an almost calculated brutality, striking with surgical precision, then falling back to consume its conquests. The scale of Leviathan's invasion was unlike anything the Imperium had witnessed. Worlds were engulfed, fleets obliterated, and entire systems fell into darkness. Amid the chaos, the planet of Baal, home of the Blood Angels, became Leviathan's primary target. Chapter Master Dante, still bearing the scars of the previous wars, once again found himself at the heart of the conflict. With a sense of grim determination, he fortified Baal, preparing his homeworld for what he knew could be the chapter's last stand. Dante was joined by Commander Calgar and the Ultramarines, the two leaders reuniting in a final alliance to defend Baal. Together, they devised a plan to lure Leviathan's main force into a series of traps, hoping to break the swarm's momentum before it could reach the populated core of the Imperium. The skies above Baal became a nightmarish battleground as Tyranid bioships clashed with Imperial vessels in a brutal void war. Below, the surface became a maelstrom of close combat, with Blood Angels, Ultramarines, and even Imperial Guardsmen fighting side by side against an unending onslaught of Tyranid creatures. Dante and Calgar stood at the forefront, their coordination and skill honed by years of combat, yet even their combined might seem insufficient against Leviathan's strength. Just when hope seemed lost, a strange phenomenon occurred. Another Xenos force, the enigmatic Necrons, intervened, drawn to the battlefield by unknown motives. Their sudden assault on Leviathan's flank broke the cohesion of the Tyranid swarm, creating an opportunity for the Imperium's forces to regroup. With grim resolve, Dante ordered a final offensive, leading the Blood Angels in a counterattack that drove the Tyranids back, securing a hard-won and unlikely victory. Leviathan's defeat marked the end of the Third Tyrannic War, but it was a victory paid for in oceans of blood and shattered worlds. Baal was left ravaged, and the Blood Angels, though victorious, were forever changed. The Imperium had barely survived, and the sight of the Tyranid swarm retreating into the void brought little solace to the weary defenders. They knew this was only a temporary reprieve. Somewhere, deep within the galaxy, the hive mind continued to evolve, learning, and preparing to strike again. Dante, scarred and wearied, looked out over the remains of Baal and understood that the Tyranid threat was a cycle that would never truly end. He knew that the Imperium stood only as long as its defenders held firm, and with each conflict, the Tyranid menace grew stronger. There would be no final victory, no lasting peace. Only the perpetual war for survival in a galaxy overrun with horrors. As the stars dimmed and the fires of Baal smoldered in the night, Dante gathered his remaining warriors, his thoughts already turning to the next battle. He knew that, though the Tyranids had been defeated for now, the hive fleets would return, hungrier and more dangerous than ever. The Tyrannic Wars had left the Imperium scarred but resolute, for they were locked in a struggle against a foe that could not be bargained with, one that only grew more monstrous with each passing encounter. And thus, the Imperium braced itself for the inevitable return of the Great Devourer, knowing that the war for the survival of humanity was far from over. In the wake of the Tyrannic Wars, the Imperium of Man found itself profoundly altered. Each engagement had revealed new horrors, and though Hive Fleet's Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan were beaten back, they left scars across the galaxy that would never truly heal. The Tyrannid threat was unlike anything the Imperium had faced, an enemy that could not be reasoned with, bargained with, or ultimately destroyed. And as the Hive mind continued to loom in the galaxy's dark corners, the Imperium's leaders recognized that to survive, they would need to fundamentally change. The unyielding hunger of the Tyrannids had pushed humanity to its very edge, forcing the Imperium to adapt, not only in its military doctrines, but in its very soul. One of the first to recognize this need for change was Chapter Master Marnius Calgar of the Ultramarines, who had led his chapter through the blood-soaked battles of Makridge, Lysios, and countless others. Calgar, a seasoned veteran, saw firsthand the limitations of conventional tactics against the relentless Tyrannid swarm. The Tyrannid's adaptability meant that even the most refined strategies became obsolete within hours, forcing Calgar and his fellow commanders to think on their feet and constantly revise their methods. Under his guidance, the Ultramarines and other Space Marine chapters began employing rapid response formations, specialized units, and unconventional warfare tactics, adaptations designed to keep pace with the Tyrannid's ever-evolving assault. This shift in doctrine went beyond battlefield tactics. The Tyrannic Wars exposed flaws in the Imperium's reliance on rigid, hierarchical command structures, which could not always respond swiftly enough to the Tyrannid menace. Calgar instituted a more flexible command approach within the Ultramarines, granting junior officers greater autonomy in the field. This was a radical shift for a chapter defined by discipline, but it proved essential in combating the unpredictable tactics of the Tyrannids. Other chapters and Imperial Guard regiments quickly adopted similar reforms, realizing that only by embracing flexibility could they hope to survive future encounters with the Hive fleets. In addition to changes in command, new weaponry and technologies were urgently developed to counter the Tyrannids' biological advantages. The Mechanicus, the Imperium's technological priesthood, had long shied away from innovation, clinging to ancient templates and relics. But the Tyrannid threat left them no choice. Working closely with the Space Marine chapters and Guard regiments, the Mechanicus began experimenting with new weapon designs tailored specifically to the Tyrannid swarm. Flammers and plasma weapons were modified to increase their effectiveness against the Tyrannid's bioarmor, while specialized munitions were created to pierce the thick exoskeletons of the larger Tyrannid bioforms. Whole new categories of warfare emerged, optimized for one purpose: to counter the Tyrannid horde. Yet it was not only the military that felt the weight of the Tyrannid wars. The psychological and cultural toll was vast, permeating all levels of imperial society. Fear of the Tyrannid spread across the Imperium like a shadow, with whispered tales of worlds left barren, and skies darkened by bioships filtering through hive cities and isolated colonies alike. In response, Imperial propaganda redoubled its efforts, painting the Tyrannids as mindless beasts to be eradicated, a tactic meant to rally the Imperium's citizenry against the Xenos' threat. But the truth was darker and more complex, for even the staunchest of citizens knew, deep down, that the Tyrannids were a foe of unparalleled horror, an enemy that could wipe out entire systems in a matter of days. This fear gave rise to an intensified xenophobia within the Imperium. For many, the Tyrannid threat became the ultimate symbol of the alien menace, fueling an already burning hatred for all Xenos. The Ecclesiarchy, the Imperium's religious authority, seized upon this, preaching sermons that framed the Tyrannids as an existential threat sent to test humanity's faith. Purges of suspected Xeno sympathizers and those deemed insufficiently devout became common, as paranoia and fanaticism spread through imperial worlds. While this bolstered morale in the short term, it also sowed division and distrust, casting a shadow over the very people it aimed to inspire. For Chapter Master Dante of the Blood Angels, who had personally witnessed the devastation of Hive Fleet Leviathan on his homeworld of Baal, the Tyrannic Wars represented not only a military challenge, but an existential one. Unlike Calgar, Dante bore the added burden of safeguarding his chapter's legacy. The Blood Angels, already marked by the curse of the Red Thirst and Black Rage, felt the toll of the Tyrannid threat even more acutely. The sheer scale of Leviathan's onslaught on Baal left Dante's forces depleted and his chapter on the brink of extinction. In the aftermath, Dante made the painful decision to accept Primaris reinforcements, warriors whose origins lay outside the traditional Blood Angel lineage. It was a choice born of necessity, marking a break with ancient traditions, but one that Dante recognized as essential if the chapter was to survive. The scars left by the Tyrannic Wars ran deeper still. On Baal and countless other worlds, the physical and psychological impact of the battles left lasting wounds on the people who had endured them. Entire generations grew up haunted by stories of alien invasions, and for those who had survived firsthand, nightmares of Tyrannid swarms were an inescapable reality. Monuments rose on battle-scarred worlds, memorials dedicated to those who had fallen to defend humanity against the Tyrannid scourge. Yet, these tributes also served as solemn reminders of a truth few dared to speak. The Tyrannids would return, and each encounter would likely be worse than the last. As the Imperium licked its wounds and prepared for the future, whispers circulated among its leaders, from Terra to the distant stars. They spoke of a new Hive Fleet, lurking somewhere beyond the galaxy's edge, even larger and more fearsome than Leviathan. Both Calgar and Dante knew that humanity could not afford to be complacent. Each victory against the Tyrannids had come at a tremendous cost, and they knew well that the Hive mind was constantly adapting, growing, learning from its defeats. The galaxy had become a perpetual battleground, with the Imperium's survival hinging on its ability to remain one step ahead of an enemy that could reshape itself to counter every conceivable tactic. In the end, the Tyrannic Wars left the Imperium changed, hardened, and weary, but also filled with a renewed determination. Calgar, Dante, and the countless warriors who had fought in the wars knew the cost of inaction. The Tyrannids were a force that could not be ignored or eradicated, a nightmare that humanity would face again and again, as inevitable as the turning of the stars. And though the Imperium stood bloodied and battered, it remained unbroken, a beacon of defiance against the devouring dark. As Dante looked out from the desolate plains of Baal, he saw not only the ruins left by Leviathan, but a future where the Imperium would face countless new Hive fleets, each more terrible than the last. The knowledge that they would come again was sobering, yet he felt no despair. For as long as the Imperium endured, its defenders would stand ready, and as long as there were warriors to fight, humanity would continue its struggle against the endless hunger of the Tyrannids, no matter the cost.